you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. You are listening to the Delphi Case Series, Episode 5, Bridge Guy Arrested. That's right, you heard it correctly. Bridge Guy was positively identified and arrested. And if that's not mind-shocking enough for you, we'll be going over even more mind-shocking information. I am, of course, your host, Bruce McGuire. If you want to support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Make sure your device allows those notifications to come through. If it's still not working, you could just go to youtube.com/mindshock for all the latest updates in our podcast releases. And you could also check out our ever-growing back catalog. Make sure to keep awareness up in this case and in other cases where justice has not been served. And keeping awareness up is, in many cases, the defining factor in what gets cases resolved. So hit that like button, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. All right, if I didn't get your attention enough, it has not been publicly stated definitively that Bridge Guy was not only ID'd definitively, but apprehended. And this is just so mind-shocking. This is quickly becoming the most confusing case out there. If you haven't checked out our previous episode, The Dark Hours, make sure you check that out. We go over a lot of details, including Doug Carter specifically stating to disregard the face. Why would he say that? And that was very mind-shocking. So we're going to be looking back and figuring out how this was all determined, how it all went down. So, from all available information, the new sketch of the younger suspect was released April 22nd, 2019. The previously released sketch is more or less clearly a different person. So this is a news bulletin that was released April 24th, 2019. Multi-agency task force clarifies points about the Delphi murder suspect sketches. Delphi, Indiana. In the early days and months of the Delphi murder investigation, information was developed about suspect descriptions. It was initially believed the sketch that had been in public view over the last 2 years of a person in the age range of his 50s to 50s was a person of interest in this murder investigation. Now, as the investigation has matured and past information has been reassessed, it is the belief of investigators with the multi-agency task force that the person depicted in the sketch released on April 22nd more accurately represents the person wanted for the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. I'll go over that real quick one more time. It is the belief of investigators with the multi-agency task force that the person depicted in the sketch released on April 22nd, this is the newer, younger guy, more accurately represents the person wanted for the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. It is important to distinguish these points about the two sketches. They are not the same person. The person depicted in the originally released sketch is not presently a person of interest in this investigation. So let me say that again. The person depicted in the originally released sketch is not presently a person of interest in this investigation. Now, the way that's phrased, does it not clearly imply that this individual was identified and ruled out? And I will be circling back to that in a moment, but let's continue here. The sketch released on April 22nd is representative of the face of the person captured in the video on Liberty German's cell phone as he was walking on the high bridge. So that's kind of weird. So basically that first sketch is from the witnesses seeing the guy walking the trails, not the guy on the bridge, according to this. The person in the sketch released April 22nd is described as having a youthful appearance but could fall in the age range from his 20s to late 30s. This person's appearance could look different today if he has grown a mustache, beard, or let his hair grow longer or cut his hair shorter than depicted in the sketch. Members of the Delphi community should reflect back on people they know in the community that look similar to the sketch released on April 22nd, especially if that person has changed their appearance since the murders occurred in February of 2017. So now, of course, it's important to distinguish that this new sketch actually was created before the originally released sketch of the older guy. So this is IndieStar.com. This article was published April 22nd, 2019 by Vic Reichart and Justin L. Mack. Delphi Murders New Sketch of Killer, and video from Libby's phone released. So it states, Master Trooper Taylor Bryant, a sketch artist with the Indiana State Police who drew the new sketch, told IndieStar a sketch is based on how a particular witness describes the suspect. If there are several witnesses, Bryant would draw a sketch for each description. Bryant did not draw the sketch that police released in July 2017. The witness is the main focus, so there's no input from law enforcement at all in the generating of a sketch other than my presence as the artist. Bryant uses a facial identification reference sheet that has a list of different categories from head shapes to different eyebrows and noses. The person will describe the suspect based on those categories. It's easier to do that than to describe the suspect using just words, Bryant said. The sketches are not exact, Bryant said. The renderings are ballpark estimation of what the person looks like. The sketch released on Monday was drawn by Bryant on February 17th. 2017, a few days after the victims' bodies were found. The picture was based on the description of a person who saw something that the person felt needed to be reported, according to Bryant. So it's unclear on how exactly they determined that this was the murderer specifically. So what details have not been made public about that witness statement? And then, of course, as we went over in the previous episode, it is likely, if not possible to some degree, that the location of the bodies was staged. And that's something I'm going to go over in the next episode when we examine law enforcement oddities and issues with the investigation. But we're going to lead into a little bit of that here with this bridge guy that was identified and arrested. Okay. So Kelsey German, Liberty's sister, stated this when someone asked her about why there was a drastic change regarding the sketch on Twitter. Kelsey German, April 22nd, 2019, responded, "A recent development is what I understand. They created several sketches at the time they believed the other one was more credible." Someone else chimed in, "This upsets me that we were shown the first one for 1.5 years and this one was hidden away. This is shoddy work." Kelsey said there was a reason for it. Thankful we have it now. So there was a reason they didn't release this particular sketch. What that reason is, we don't know. But Kelsey is stating that there was a reason. Now, whether she knows the reason or not, or she's just saying there was a reason because she was assured that there was a good reason, that is unknown. So now let's move to definitive information here about this bridge guy suspect being arrested and identified early on. So there's a podcast, Best Case, Worst Case. So Jim Clemente, so this is a former state prosecutor, former FBI criminal profiler. He's involved in many different cases. He does different podcasts, considered a pretty credible expert. And of course, he has sources in the FBI, having worked for the FBI. So this is what was said. Episode 122 of Best Case, Worst Case. Just beyond 33 minutes. Jim Clemente says this, quote, "And I think what must have happened is they have taken these leads. They have interviewed literally thousands of people, and they have found someone who looks at that video that they released and says, yes, I definitely saw that guy minutes before the girls came by, and I saw his face, and that's where the sketch came from. And so the other sketch was somebody saw in the area and was suspicious about. Turns out it's a guy who's sexually interested in children who's had multiple arrests for it, right? At 36 minutes, 42nd, Francie Hakes states this. And Francie Hakes on the podcast here, she is a child protection and national security consultant. She was formerly a federal prosecutor and first national coordinator for the child exploitation prevention and interdiction. So these are people with sources within the FBI. The police obviously know who they're looking for and spent a significant amount of time looking for the man in this sketch. And as you said, Jim, that man, it turned out, recently was arrested and was a sex offender. But what we found out recently was he is apparently not the killer. So it's very interesting that she used the word apparently. Because what was said by her sources in the FBI and Clementi, what did they say exactly? Because she didn't say he was not the killer. He is apparently not the killer. So was the information not definitive here? So obviously this caused some uproar by people closely following the case who happened to listen to this particular podcast at the time. I did not. And so these are people's comments on Reddit. I was confused about this as well, decided to message the podcast through Facebook. I confirmed with them that I didn't misunderstand what they were saying about the original sketch, an arrest being made that cleared that man. They confirmed that they did say that, and that, quote, that is what we have heard from our sources, end quote. So we have Clementi and Hakes, these individuals who, by all accounts, are not dialed into, are not part of Delphi law enforcement. They have no reason to cover up for local law enforcement. So this information is supposedly coming from official channels. So here's what's interesting, and someone chimed in here on Reddit as well. What are the chances that a sex offender creep unrelated to the case was seen in and around the trails that day? So someone else responded, they went on the podcast to explain that there are places and times that attract that kind of person. The example they gave is college campuses at the beginning of the semester, basically comparing the bridge trail to that because it was a known place young people hung out around. So they called it a target-rich environment. So, see, here's the thing, though. I don't know. This is an interesting coincidence. So a guy that is the sketch, he was seen there. So some kind of sex offender on the prowl was there but didn't commit the crime. So not that that's unbelievable. That's possible. But what kind of major hangout spot is this? Because from other people that have chimed in on forums and on social media, not everyone in Delphi even knows about the Monon High Bridge. It's like any kind of town. There's some semi-popular hangout that people who know about it, they like going there, but there's plenty of people who don't know about it. So again, this is coming from people who actually live in Delphi and that area. They have stated that not everybody knows about the bridge. So it's not the most popular landmark that every single person knows about. So I don't know what the exact percentage is. Can we estimate half the people know about it? Less than half? I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know if there was an official survey done. But apparently not everybody knows about it. So would it preclude, so depending on how many offenders or child predators are in the area, I mean, this almost reminds me of the Amy Mihalovic case, which if you haven't checked that out, check out the MINDSHOCK podcast on Amy's case. It is also so many rabbit holes. I'll be releasing the next episode in that series soon as well. It's just so mind-shocking, but that case is actually a perfect example where they actually tracked down several separate individuals who were all stalking, I'm sure that's the right word. They had their eye on Amy specifically. Now, if they also had their eye on other children, that is unknown, possibly. But there was no shortage in that area. But here we're talking about a trail system in Delphi, 2017. Again, Delphi is not the most populated city. It is not just this huge tourist destination. If it were, that would be a lot more believable. And not that this isn't believable, but here's where my thoughts are going to go to, is that there were some accomplices involved. And again, even in the Amy case, those are my thoughts as well. And some of these unsolved cases where people are so-called ruled out or definitively ruled out due to alibis or things of other nature, that doesn't mean they don't know the perpetrators. If these are shady individuals with shady friends, they might hear things. They might hear rumors. They might be involved actively. They might not actively be involved. But to just completely clear them and dismiss them, I don't know. So supposedly there is a lot of DNA at the scene where the bodies were found, staged or not. So did they clear him by saying, okay, well, his DNA was not on the bodies or underneath their fingernails or whatnot? Even if it weren't, is it possible he was some kind of a lookout or accomplice? Maybe he wasn't directly involved, but it's interesting that they have not announced this to the public. Do they know that he has an accomplice, and that if they did announce it to the public, they would want to kill him or something to shut him up? I don't know. But we do have to look at these statistical anomalies, and are they really anomalies? Were there other offenders walking the trails that day? I mean, I don't know what the estimate were. There could have been upwards of 80 people total that day in the trail system. Out of the 80 people, is it out of the realm of possibility that there were several offenders that had nothing to do with the murders? Possibly. But so they were saying this is not the guy in the video coming up to them. This was simply some other guy that was walking the trails. But why does law enforcement not clearly clarify all of these things? So there's a little bit more information here. Apparently, Abby's mom posted on Facebook shortly after the new sketch was released that they released the second sketch because they cleared the first person. But that's all we really have here. How exactly he was cleared is unknown. So Abby's mom also said this on a podcast as well, that the individual in the first released sketch, the old bridge guy we can call him, he was arrested and supposedly cleared. So I'm just going to read a couple more responses here on social media. So a sex offender who just happened to be in the area where 2 girls were abducted and killed in a remote wooded area didn't do it. A response here, correct. DNA and fingerprints are on file with the CODIS and IAFIS being a sex offender and rapist. So if these samples did not match the DNA left at the scene, apparently they cleared him. Supposedly they do not match any other convicted felon in the system. So the perp that murdered the girls is not in the DNA database at the moment, hence no arrest almost 4 years after the double slaying. Someone else responded here, yes, unless the person had a slam dunk, ironclad alibi, I'd not believe it. I have no idea what law enforcement know, but I would certainly hope that something like a family member providing an alibi or the absence of DNA at the scene isn't enough to conclusively rule out someone as a suspect. It may not be enough to arrest and prosecute them, but it definitely doesn't clear them. I'm very curious how and why law enforcement abandoned the first sketch and cleared the sex offender and shifted their search towards the younger guy. Another response here, I spent way more time than I'm proud to admit scouring details about him, and there isn't much. All I found were 3 photos that didn't show up anywhere. They make you think but aren't very interesting. One at a wedding, one just chilling, and one standing by an old car. All very different times and all very blurry, mainly because they were cached previews of a site that no longer hosts the real images. Anyway, the full PE story is that cops did investigate. The full story is that cops did investigate a Delphi connection, possibly, but don't appear to be investigating it further. This guy lived an odd life, worked all day entirely alone on his elderly parents' farm, meaning nobody could provide an alibi or say he was missing or acting weird that day. I'm not 100% convinced it wasn't him, but I'm fairly convinced that everything we know now is everything we'll know about him. The other thing, of course, someone else astutely chimed in, we don't know if the DNA is usable or even from Bridge Guy. That doesn't mean anything. And that's a curious point as well. Again, if this was a lookout or something, we really don't know. Now, regarding the witnesses, we have a few problems because, as Doug Carter said on the Megyn Kelly show, which I went over in the previous episode, he said there were no witnesses, which is interesting. So nobody saw the guy. So I don't know why he said that. It's strange, but in other sources, law enforcement had said that there were witnesses. We just went over a few. And the 16-year-old witness apparently described the first sketch, the older Bridge Guy, who is supposedly cleared. So if she did see him, her timeline where she saw him at 1:30 p.m. or so, that could be disregarded if it's not the guy. Now, if it's an accomplice, then there's some issues, of course. But if there were two people working this, committing this crime, and I mean, would they not be more likely to control two teenagers, particularly if there was another guy walking around, maybe with a rifle or whatnot, and they were clearly together? Would that get the girls to comply? I don't know. As I stated in the previous episode, supposedly there were rumors that the girls screamed as soon as he told them to go down the hill. In which case, the time frame is quite curious. And of course, regarding the witness for the sketch, this might be a witness that is not known to the public, again, either for safety purposes or for whatever other reasons that law enforcement is not disclosing a lot of information. So here is an interesting theory on the timeline of the sketches. So if young Bridge Guy was not spotted on the trails on the day of the double murder, because there was a sighting of a young guy on 625 North near a driveway, which was the source of the young guy's sketch. So if someone claimed to have spoken with her, so if law enforcement spoke with the lady in the driveway, she gave them info for the sketch, but they disregarded it because they thought it was less likely to be related, and they went with the old Bridge Guy theory. Once old Bridge Guy was arrested and cleared, now they had to go back to this lady, even though they had this information. They had this other sketch right off the bat. They thought for whatever reason it might not be relevant, and they were, for whatever reason, convinced that it was the old Bridge Guy. Then they realized they made a mistake and they're going with the young guy sketch. Is that how this all went down? And of course, law enforcement wouldn't admit that they were mistaken anyway, and that's another issue with a lot of these investigations, where you have egos on the line and all these issues. In the next episode, I'll be going over the law enforcement issues, of which there's no shortage, and there's far more damning and mind-shocking evidence that the bodies were not there during the search, and that they were placed there the following day in the early hours. So that's what we're going over next. But in this episode, again, this has not been publicly revealed that the older sketch, this guy was identified and arrested and supposedly cleared. Now, how long that took, a year and a half, I don't know. Maybe they had information earlier. Maybe they did think he was an accomplice. Maybe somehow they determined that he was not an accomplice. Maybe there's a whole bunch of police corruption that needs to be exposed, because if this old Bridge Guy, if he's working with law enforcement in some kind of corruption or drug trafficking, racketeering of some kind, and he has info on them, he would give up the info on them to the FBI. So if they got ahead of the game, local PD apprehended this guy, they pretended to clear him so that nobody else would look at him. The question is, would the FBI not double check all of this? I don't know. It's quite bizarre. But if no one saw the actual killer, so again, something we haven't particularly discussed, what if the actual murderer never went on the trails and was never on that side of the bridge with the trails? If he had an accomplice, the accomplice might have been, or if there was no accomplice and there was just some other predator offender of some kind prowling the trails, that somehow it was determined that he was not related to this. I mean, if it's somebody that just walks those trails every single day, he has a record, he would probably walk that day also, right? Because if he walks every day, he would walk that day too. So perhaps it's not the greatest, perhaps it really is a coincidence. Every case is allowed one. But once you start stacking those coincidences into a giant pile, that's where problems start to arise. And we'll be going over a lot more of those in the next episode. But the police definitely did not do anybody any favors by saying in the early days that the sketch could be, that the perpetrator could look like a mix of both sketches, because that's just putting out really confusing information. Or are certain entities within law enforcement and FBI, are they not communicating with each other? And that's why we're getting all these different pieces of information released. It's just really bizarre. Here's a depressing comment on social media that I will close this podcast out with. The smaller towns get higher concentration of felons here in Indiana. When I originally made the comment, I was certain to make the disclaimer that I was not trying to smear entire communities, but yes, Indiana tends to be fairly quiet with its issues, but our smaller towns are problematic. There's a hospital and doctor's office everywhere. The doctors generally do not live in those communities. The exit of manufacturing coupled with the opioid crisis make the hardest hit communities in Midwest America. These towns can't keep good men because they will all leave for the bigger towns and city, leaving behind bad men. Some good sprinkled in, but mostly bad men in low-wage, low-skilled jobs, despite the wealth of job training programs. Unfortunately, there's a lot of lonely women who already are living in strained conditions with children and no one to sit. They oftentimes get with felons or any man they can find. Some common relationship combos are nurses and felons, school teachers and felons. Another, both parents aren't doing well, so grandparent is raising them. Again, I don't want to label an entire community, nor what was going on amongst the families. But I must speak on what the overwhelming makeup in these smaller Indiana villages is. Now, that's really interesting because that's something that's not really discussed that much in the mainstream. Unfortunately, there's a lot of problems. The opioid crisis is simply one of them. But yes, low-wage jobs, a lot of people living in poverty or borderline poverty, and there's just a lot of issues. A lot of issues where the other people that were walking the trails, I'm not sure every single person that even walked those trails was positively identified or spoke with police. You would think so, but if it was in particular some kind of felon afraid of police or with a long record, maybe he did see something. Maybe there's a witness that as of yet has not come forward that not necessarily saw the crime happening, but saw a strange individual walking, perhaps not on the main trail, but elsewhere. Who knows? So yeah, there's still so many variables to go over, and there's a lot of problems here. And again, from Doug Carter, disregard the face. Just very interesting. Very, very interesting. And he said that earlier on as well. So yeah, there's a lot of problems here, a lot more to go over. Hope you guys found this another mind-shocking and informative episode, and the ongoing conversation and awareness can continue to push this case to some kind of closure so that justice can be found. You can donate to our PayPal to help us get out more podcasts and cover even more cases, cold cases, and otherwise. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Like this podcast. Share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, and Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire, signing off. Catch you guys next time.